Well, thank you again for being here. I appreciate you guys fighting the weather and joining us for this great panel. I'm really excited. Like you heard, I'm a parent of two Dallas ISD students who are in after-school care, so something I think about right now and my kids are involved in, and that I had as well. Although I think I sent my bio soccer, but I did go to an after-school program. And if I did some mental gymnastics, I think I could justify that the dodgeball and bingo I played after school really prepared me for today's workforce. But it would take a lot of work. So it's a good point to think about in terms of how are we using that time? Are we being productive? No knocks against bingo and dodgeball. There's definitely time for that. No headshots, but today's discussion I think is going to focus on just being more intentional about that time. How can we as a community think about supporting this time, and then how can we as parents and teachers and folks involved with after school programming really just focus our energy thinking about the future. So we talked about sort of preparing, Byron talked about we're preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, right, which is a challenge for all educators. The former teacher in me thought about that as well. I want to start with you, Craig. I'm going to venture to say that your job did not exist when you were in after-school care, 15 or 10 years ago, whenever you were in after school. So, but you have a fascinating, diverse career that got mentioned a little bit. Working with your hands, welding. There's a counseling degree in there, I think, that maybe didn't get mentioned. Now you're obviously with AWS. Talk about your own skill development and how those skills. How you transferred between such diverse careers and kind of built things along the way, because I think that's what our students are going to have to do. They're going to have some sort of core skill that can be applied in a lot of areas. So tell us how you did it.
Yeah, thank you. It's a bizarre world where we think about skills development as this straight line through an educational pathway, right? You're going to start in kindergarten, you're going to learn your basics, and then you're going to go to college. But we find that it's not anywhere near a straight line, and especially in my life. But I like to think about skills as, I go back to the movie Karate Kid, when Jackie Chan tells him everything is kung fu, right? Everything is skills development. Everything that we do, every experience that we have, how we interact with our parents, how we play board games, how we interact with our peers and teachers, everything is skills development. The problem is we don't know how to capture those skills and articulate them. So that in and of itself is a skill that we have to teach and we have to learn. For my career, I started out in I say food and beverage. I started out in fast food, where I learned customer service and I learned time management and I learned how to show up to work on time and not be distracted and be present in work. From there, I moved into working in the casinos. I'm from Las Vegas, so working in the casinos in food and beverage, and working as a busboy and as a waiter, and how to manage that time and how to deal with difficult people, because lots of difficult people in that world, right? But those are skills that I had to have in order to move to my next step. Where when my wife told me she was pregnant, I said, "Oh well, I have to have a real career, right? I have to actually pay for these kids, but I don't have time or money to go to college." So I served an apprenticeship. I was a sheet metal worker. Did a 5-year apprenticeship through that, and that's more of a linear skills development. But all of those skills that I learned in food and beverage translated into that and helped me be successful in that, especially because I ended up going into the classroom and teaching as an instructor for the Sheet Metal Local 88 in Las Vegas. And to be able to work with those students and give them the skills that they need in order to be successful as a sheet metal worker. Well, that translated into me going and getting my bachelor's degree in adult education, and then going and working at the College of Southern Nevada. I was director of apprenticeship studies over there because of my experience working through with apprenticeships and building apprenticeships, and what does that look like and how does that work? So spending time at the College of Southern Nevada, and then from there, because I built relationships with the unions and because I was working in education, the governor tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I need you to lead our Office of Workforce Innovation." So I went and I led for the state the workforce system, right? I worked with the WIOA system. We ran the Governor's Workforce Development Board. We were the state apprenticeship agency. So, translating all those skills that I had learned from fast food and And working with those students, I was able to convene the system and bring people around to create common goals. And then from there, I went to Nevada System of Higher Education. I was the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Workforce Development there because I had learned all about workforce and that system and WIOA and how all of that comes together to work in skills development and what that looks like in a traditional setting, and to be able to help the colleges to align their programs of study along that. And then all of that translated, go back. During that time, I ended up doing my master's degree in marriage and family counseling, which sounds like it's way out there, like this little misnomer. But I had every intention of becoming a marriage and family counselor, but then I realized, you know what, even with the private practice, it doesn't pay very well. And so I still had to make money for those kids that I mentioned earlier. But even today, with every single job that I've had since then, those skills of being able to work with people to create common goals and help them to realize what they need to do instead of me telling them what they need to do, those are all skills that all came together. And then when this opportunity came with AWS to come in and be able to do that work from the private side and help educational systems build that, all of those experiences from my parents, board games, food and beverage, all of that came together to give me the perfect set of skills to be able to do what I do today. And if I hadn't been able to have all of those experiences that seem like they're all over the board, I would not be able to do this work.
Quite a journey, and definitely gives us pause to think about how each moment in the students' lives and moments in our lives can kind of build on each other and work together. Jarrad, we're going to come to you next. You've spent a lot of time, whether it's working with Cory Booker, TEA, now at the Chamber, kind of thinking about big picture things, education, workforce development, the economy, now maybe a little more focused on local economy and employers. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how the modern workforce requires us to rethink the learning day, and especially outside of school, and how that time factors into that reset.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and big thanks to folks at Amazon, Vicky, for helping to host this. And when the book was announced, I reached out to Byron and said, in the words of Joe Biden, this is a big freaking deal. Because I do believe this is a timely and imperative message. But when we think about out of school time, in my opinion, it almost is a misnomer if we think about sort of after school, out of school time, because it frames it almost as an abutment to the learning day, as something that is sort of an appendix to the learning day, when it should be really one of the main drivers of learning, instruction, and development for our students. There's a huge mismatch between the needs of our economy and our education system right now. And I believe that there's no better platform by which to address that mismatch than extended learning time, or what we think of as out of school time. Our education system right now is based upon a centuries-old agrarian model, 8 to 3, 180 days, summers off. When we know our economy is changing rapidly in real time. When we leave this building today, there will be new aspects to jobs, the labor market in our economy than when we walked in. That's how rapidly our economy is changing. And schools don't do a great job. They're not built to accommodate that. And so the opportunity to infuse civic education, work-based learning, project-based learning, hands-on application, and the 3 R's of relevance, rigor, and relationships into the instruction that takes place in a student's learning experience is not just a nice to have, but it's a must have. And so, in my opinion, the notion of out of school time as something that is sort of an elective experience that certain students will take advantage of, I believe is far gone. We are now in a period where this should be a across the board expectation for all of our students because the need is that great and the imperative is that strong. Right now, students spend about 20% of their waking lives in school. That leaves a lot of other variables and factors that do not address what the economy needs, and most importantly, what that student needs to be a meaningful, active participant in not only our economy but in our civic community.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we all think about our time as a student. Those moments, classes, relationships that probably stick with us are those times when the rigor and the relevance were there. Maybe it's a coach, a club, a class that really stuck with us. For me, it was a class called PALS, where we were like mentor of little kids, and like those skills of like listening, how to start a conversation with a random person that doesn't know who you are, maybe doesn't want to be there. Right. Like those skills are obviously, I feel like that's every day, especially as a journalist. So I love those. Those 3 R's are really great. Armando, we're going to go to you. Now, you brought a long history in the classroom and writing curriculum to Big Thoughts, and we heard that heard this term thrown out, creator archetype. So you're already rubbing your hands, but can you tell us like what that is and how we can take advantage of outside of school time to develop those timeless skills, and how the creator archetype kind of factors into that?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for you all have teed me up. So PALS actually is the reason why I decided to become a teacher. So pre that experience, my junior year in high school, I was going to be a theater nerd because since kindergarten, I had driven my teachers crazy. And so I was acting because I was acting out. They said, well, let's put you somewhere positive. I was singing, I was dancing. So I was going to go do that. But PALS helped me realize that. But nobody helped me realize that. I had to realize it myself. What the creator archetype does is we have been able to, can you tell I love my job? Boil down those 21st century skills, those things that you all have alluded to, and that Chike will talk about is the necessity that we must, right? He's gonna do that clarion call of what we have to do as a nation as we step forward into this workforce and this future, is we have to boil down what do they need? And so we have identified 5 domains. And in those domains, we have subsets of skills, and we have boiled it down to a specific identified skill for each. So in PALS, in the creator archetype, we would say you develop social emotional learning foundations, which is domain 1. But you also help those children with academics and artistry, which is domain 2, to work on their development with reading or whatever he was tasked to come in. Then with our 3rd domain, design thinking, he also had to think of how he was going to create and modify and project manage his time with this youth, right? With domain 4, it's digital fluency. Nowadays, PALS would look different because we step into this AI age and this way of using tools and playtime. And maybe if PALS, he would be taken out of school, right? So he could meet with the child or on Saturdays. And then the 5th is civics and service. And PALS is civics and service because it's activating him as a mentor and teaching him how to engage and be a responsible citizen. Those are our 5 main domains. And there are 239 specifically identified skills within that, with 3 gradations of beginner, intermediate, and advanced to step through. And all of us step through differently, right? So if I, who am a self-described Luddite, as my friend and I, now, can I use technology? I can, and I have to because it's my job. But I'd rather read a book, which we'll talk about that as one of my other questions about you've got to read this book. I still have to learn how to manage those skills. So I start a lot of things as a beginner. And then I tap my daughter and 2 boys to bring me to the intermediate phase, right? And then I have lovely, wonderful apprentices that are now peers at work who help bring me into that advanced stage as well, right? So we all step through, and that's what the creator archetype does. It helps us actually boil it down. It also helps you, the program providers, to understand what do I provide in my programming. But it also helps set up the artist and the teaching artist and the teacher to also know, with this language, I have actively bolded in red for them. These are the active verbs that the children and the teacher must practice to express this skill in a way that the youth can see it so they can know that they did it and they've captured it. That's what the creator archetype does. It is the foundation of what we believe they need to do to step in the place. And I'll tell you one quick story because I've only got 3 minutes. So we have lots of wonderful programs at Big Thought, and we also support lots of programs. And part of my job is like, we're gonna fly out again to Lubbock to work with them to build a youth program, and we're utilizing the creator archetype to help them identify the skills. But the argument that we hold for the creator archetype skills and the language of being so specific is that it also helps the youth. So one of our programs, we just finished, Artivism. The youth, or I'm sorry, A-Live. The youth were working on spoken word, and it was an after-school program. And one of our youth, and I just done the award ceremony, and I literally printed out for them so they could see it and hold it, the skills that they just earned over the last 8 weeks. And I had just done the award ceremony for the youth and expressly read through them and handed them their congratulatory pieces and certificates, and then their digital credentials they could go bring into their DCOL profiles and then put on LinkedIn and whatnot. And so I just handed it to the youth and said, okay, guys, you're great. I had a parent walk in the middle of it, and she's like, what? We just did this? So we unpacked and talked about it. But that wasn't the beauty. The beauty was I left, and one of the young ladies had been getting in trouble. She was blowing off steam, and so she got in trouble in after-school programming and some other things 2 weeks before in a different program. And so her dad was coming to collect her, and he was like, come on, let's go. This is a waste of time. And she goes, no, Dad. No, Dad. This isn't a waste of time. Now, quick snapshot is this child is now a freshman this year attending one of the top 10 schools always in the United States, right? So who was the one that went to the tag school? Right? That's what I thought. Your alma mater, right? So he wasn't playing around with, wasting time because she needs to attend this top tier school, and she doesn't have this time to waste because her future is now, which is true. But she was able to take those 2 certificates and flip them over, and she said, Dad, no, I have to do this again when I get to Townview. I have to, Dad. I have to have other programs like this because look at the skills that I get in these programs. This is what it taught me how to manage time, because she was one of the lead directors that would film for the youth. She was also the project manager that worked with the youth to figure out what order they would go and say, okay, listen, Byron, you spoke last week. Let's give Ania a chance because she hasn't spoken in 2 weeks. She had those skills. So she was able to unpack those skills with her father that he said, okay, 1, we're going to put on the refrigerator, right? But 2, that's fine. When you go back to town, I'll make sure that you get to have some of these programs. That is the power of being able to boil it down and give the language. And that's what the creator archetype does. And that is my honor to go around and help others unpack and learn. And it also helps them be able to talk to donors, right? And say, no, these are the workforce skills that the youth walk away with from our programming. This is why you want to donate. It also empowers our artists because they have beautiful visions of something that is so hard to grasp, to cogently connect it. And that's what I get to do.
Yeah, being able to articulate those skills is such an important part of the learning process that a lot of times you don't get to do. You kind of look back and like, oh, I did learn that. But if you're conscious of it in the moment, I think it solidifies it and does it much more quickly. Chike, we'll go to you. You approach this issue sort of from a macroeconomic point of view. I'd like to hear from you just what does our economy need from students developing skills for jobs that don't yet exist and won't be done by artificial intelligence. Hopefully there's a middle ground in there somewhere. And how does OST factor into that skill development?
So first of all, let me just start off and just say thank you, number 1, to Byron, who's been my brother for a very long time, and to Shannon, everyone here at Big Thought, and also, frankly, all of you, because if you've not caught on yet, this is also partially a challenge and a charge to each of you. You're being recruited if you didn't know. I'll let the cat out of the bag in terms of the work that will need to be done, because nothing worth doing can be done alone. Let me answer that question by let me take the title of this book, Built for More. Let me talk about the more, and then let me talk about the built. So when we talk about the more that we're preparing students for, let me throw out a couple of numbers. There's a survey that comes from the Department of Labor where I used to work. It's called the JOLTS survey. Job Openings, Labor Turnover Survey, JOLTS. And it tells you a ton of things. What it generally tells you is this number. Per 10 jobs, how many Americans are looking for those jobs? So in June, it's usually done quarterly. In June, in America, there were 8 people looking for every 10 jobs open. Let me repeat that. there were 8 people looking for every 10 jobs open, meaning that even if every person got a job, there's still 2 jobs in America per 10 left open. In Maryland, where I am from, that is 3 people looking for every 10 jobs. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the history of the nation, where I think we're at 2.7, 2.8%. Let's talk about the size of the US workforce. So generally, just if you've ever looked at kind of population statistics, to keep your population and your workforce at the same level, every couple in America would need to have 2.1 kids. The current status is 1.66. So even if every single American worked in a job that they were supposed to be in, we still have a gap, pretty significant one. So I say that to say we have no person to waste. We have no person to waste. And I think about all the types of communities and kids that you all are serving, we need all of them. More than data, more than oil, more than anything. That is the greatest resource this country has. Not just for the moral cause, but also for our economic future. And even as someone who served at the federal level, the geopolitical standpoint. I'll use a quote. If you listen to the earnings call, listen to a lot of earnings calls from NVIDIA last quarter. NVIDIA is, depending on the day of the week, the 3rd or 2nd most valuable company in the world. Maker of the most powerful, most advanced AI chips in the world, the Blackwell chip. Their CEO said, I choose which orders to fill because I do not have enough people and enough supplies to build everything that people want from me. I have a number of colleagues sitting in the federal administration who literally are working every single day to make sure that America is competing there. This is a geopolitical concern. When about the more that we're preparing these kids, our kids for, it's that. It is a world that we don't have enough people to forward these amazing technologies that can change the world or destroy it, depending on how we prepare these kids. So that's the more. Let's talk about the build. How do we build these kids? Or let me say it more obviously. How do we help them build themselves for this more? And I generally think about it in 3 ways. The first way is what I call just-in-time skills. These are skills that you need at this very moment because of the way the world is changing this very moment. For example, in the last 2 years, a just-in-time skill has been prompt engineering. How do I type in the exact set of words to get this thing, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever, to fit back the right thing? It's been learning about cloud in a different way. We didn't use the word hyperscaler before 2 years ago, which is part of this invisible seed corn that makes AI possible, just as one example. But those are things that happen and they change quick. If you learned prompt engineering 2 years ago, it's different today. If you learned cloud 5 years ago, it's very different today because we're entirely different applications. But that is the just-in-time skills. Then there are what I call the timeless skills. These are the things that human beings have been doing and learning for a long time. They're the things that are really hard to quantify, or hopefully what we heard here is going to make it easier. But when workers don't have them, things get very tough. Yeah. We call them soft skills, but things get very hard when you don't have them. One thing that I hear a lot from employers is, I asked an employer once, very recently, what's a skill that you're missing from a lot of your workers? They said conflict resolution. They have conflicts in their teams because more teams are now virtual, more teams are in geographically different places, and they're having a harder time resolving conflict. How do you measure that, learn that? How do you communicate in ways that are not necessarily clever, but clear, which is harder than we think. But these are skills, and they're skills that are not learned from reading a book. They're not skills that are learned from watching a video. They're skills you learn like an athlete. How many former athletes do we have, even if it was like middle school, high school? Whether it was a soccer goal, whether it was hitting a home run, whether it was throwing a football, whether it was making a jump shot, you did not watch someone do it. Someone showed you how to do it, then you tried it, usually in a risk-free environment. Practice. You sucked the first time. Did it again and again. You were coached, and then you got better in practice. Then they put you in the game. And you actually weren't as good in the game as you were in practice. And so you had to get better and better. And all along the way, there was a coach who watched you and helped you get better. And that's how you get better at those timeless. So think about all of you. The first time you went to a meeting at your job, you probably said something you weren't supposed to. Probably did something you weren't supposed to. And someone, if you were lucky, pulled you aside and said, hey, by the way, don't say it again. Or, hey, try saying it this way next time. And you went to another meeting, and you tried it that way. And they said, hey, that was better, but hey, try this. That's how we develop those timeless skills. Last skill, and I call it just learning to learn. As things change so rapidly, and also as you change, you were an entry-level person, then now you're a frontline manager. Now you're the regional VP. Even the things that you were good at, you learn to do differently. How do you learn to learn? How do you basically teach yourself? on how to do those things. When we think about what the workforce is going to write, that what we're building for, when I think about out of school time, that is the perfect environment, risk-free, hopefully, with a coach that is that exposes you to all the necessary experiences and information to be ready for that workforce of the future. And if we're candid, the most privileged among us have always gotten that. If we're candid, those of us who've had resources or know people who've had resources, they got a version of that. Maybe it was that their dad knew somebody and said, hey, why don't you go work in so-and-so's law office after school, a couple hours a week. And they got that. Hey, you got to be on the varsity team, and you learned some of that. Hey, you got to take a tour of somebody's shop floor after school. And the question now is, how do we make those experiences that some people got and make them available to everyone? Not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's a smart thing to do. Because if we don't, go back to the numbers I gave you, 8 people looking for every 10 jobs open. We can't fill even those 8 jobs per 10. So when I think about why we have to do this and why we have to get to that more, and also how do we build it, it's going to require a lot of what you just heard from this man, which is that out of school time also has to be more. It has to be bigger. It has to be different. It has to be so much more intentional, so much more strategic, and also so much more of a partnership. Because we put a lot on the folks who run these programs. As someone who started my career as a teacher, how do we help them be less of a purveyor of information, but more of a trained conductor of experiences? And how do we help the people that you work with and work for come in and out of these students' lives so that they can see this wider world, so that when they get to that wider world, it's not so big, it's not so scary. They're ready. Or at least they know they can get ready because of what they've been prepared with. So this is far longer than ever amount of time I was supposed to talk. But if I can say anything to the folks who are in this room, the people that you represent, we need this as a country and a world to be successful. All these big challenges you see on TV that you read about, part of the solution is sitting here in this room and sitting here with the kids that we are looking to do better by and to serve out of school time.
Can I just make a comment on that real quick? Awesome, by the way, amazing. What I would add to that is, if we're not strategic the way you're talking about, if everything is skills development, right, like I mentioned,
Yes.
If we don't structure it right and students are learning the right skills, they're gonna learn the wrong skills. And it's gonna take them down the wrong path. So we have to be strategic in everything that he said.
Or reinforce the negative story that's put upon them.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
That's the other beautiful thing about the safe space for the coaching, because we want to prepare them from those games, right? And allow them in and out of other coaching experiences completely.
You know, or even not even be able to articulate the skills they might have been developing.
Correct.
Whether it was taking care of their 2-year-old, they didn't feel like they were in a good after-school program, but
Right.
there's still obviously big skill development there. And Chike, I appreciate that. My next coaching duty, I'm going to incorporate the geopolitical needs of our country into my halftime talk. I'm going to make that connection like you did. So I appreciate that.
Just a flag waving
yeah.
behind you. Yeah.
So guys, Russia. I know we're playing the ponies, but I want you to think about the UN. Okay, Craig, we're actually going to stick back with you. We heard a little bit about your role, skills to job lead at AWS, but I'm curious of, a little bit more about kind of what that is. I think that's a good example of how the modern economy is sort of taking this issue that we're talking about and like putting it into practice and really working through it. So tell us a little about your role and sort of how it shapes how you think about this issue of out of school time.
Yeah, so the skills to jobs team at AWS at the highest level, it's trying to address the disconnect that we have between education and workforce. Right? The employers need one thing, educators are teaching them, and where is the gap at that? So we've developed comprehensive skills maps around certain roles, and we look beyond just the cloud roles. We're AWS, so yeah, we want to include cloud in everything, right? But what are the timeless skills that a person needs to be successful in these jobs? What are the technical skills so we've mapped those out, and we've vetted those maps with dozens of different employers. So the work itself is really going into post-secondary education and helping them take their programs and do a gap analysis compared to these skills maps, and then find ways to fill those gaps. And then on the other end is working with employers to hire those students from those pathways, and bridging that gap, and bringing together the conversation between industry and education. So that's at the highest level. So just looking at the skills that are needed in order for students to be successful. When we talk to employers, we find a lot that, yeah, technical skills are important, but they can be taught fairly easily, right? Students can develop those skills. It's those timeless skills that Chike was talking about that are a lot of times lacking in there. I always like to use the example, we've had this conversation with what skills are you looking for with so many different industry partners. And one that continues to rise to the top that surprised me in the beginning was the concept of intellectual curiosity. Intellectual curiosity is, are you curious about learning more about what you're doing? So as a student, are you joining clubs? Are you doing projects on your own and putting them online? Are you, how are you developing your own skills outside of the classroom? And so that's great. We're able to do that. Employers want to see that. But do students know that they need to communicate that on a resume? Do they need to communicate that in an interview? That in and of itself is a skill that needs to be taught, that students need to have. So being able to articulate those skills to the schools and to other people to say, hey, outside of the structured classroom, there's other ways to teach these things, and there's other things that need to happen that a student needs to do outside of their traditional school day in order to be successful in some of these careers and be successful in their application, because we have, sometimes 100 openings for a certain job type, and we might have 300 people applying for it. The ones that rise to the top are the ones that are able to articulate those skills that are above and beyond those base technical skills that you have to get the job. And we do a lot of what we call behavioral interviewing. So we bring students in and they have to be able to articulate that in those interviews and be able to communicate, yeah, I have these other skills that you're looking for beyond just those technical skills. So I think, how do we communicate that? How do we develop systems that support learning around that? That's an important conversation that we need to have, and we just don't do a good job of it at this point.
Yeah, I love what you said about curiosity and my time in the classroom, knowing that because of burdens put upon us, I didn't spend enough time fostering curiosity, right, and allowing time for that. And I think outside of school time, because of things are, the way they are, is a great opportunity for doing that. And as a journalist, that's my whole job, except I get to be curious about what other people are doing, not what I'm doing. So it's even better, because then I can just ask questions about it and then sit back and listen. So Jarrad, we're going to come to you next. Sometimes we think about outside of school time. I could see, a more privileged family or community thinking, oh, we don't need to really be so intentional about outside of school time. Let them have a break. Like Chike said, chances are that break or that outside of school time, it really was skill building in another way, right? Whether it was equestrian camp or, chess club or whatever, and me trying to think of, whatever. Anyways, so activities that I couldn't afford. Right. So, but I want to hear from you. How does that opinion, that toward outside of school time sort of sit with what you know about workforce development, what you are thinking about in terms of the way the modern economy is moving?
Yeah. So what you've heard over and over is that our economy is shifting dramatically. And Chike made the point with regard to soft skills or employability skills. When we talk to employers, that's the number one thing. It is by far soft skills, period, in many instances. And when we unpack that, it is effectively what a young adult or student has the opportunity to develop in an educational or in an employer-based setting that is often not found or easily replicated in a classroom. That's one of the big missing pieces. And so for even our most privileged students and families, The domain of that skill development is typically what we have done is summer internships, right? Like that's where we sort of kind of identify as the opportunity for students to go through that skill development. But if we think about that in juxtaposition to the need and to the 12 years of education that a student is going through in a traditional classroom setting, we see the mismatch, right? In terms of a summer or 2 summers before you graduate, then you're off into the workplace. And what employers are saying over and over again is that when they get to us, it's too late. We're not the ones who have the time, capacity, or resources to develop soft skills for our entry level or our new talent. They are firmly in belief that that is something that is the domain of the education system and of the families that produce these workers and these future workers. And so if we think about what that entails, it is not only true for the student who comes from Pleasant Grove, like myself, or Oak Cliff, like Byron. It's true for the kid in Highland Park. It's true for the kid in Grapevine Mills. Is that a place?
Grapevine Mills?
Yeah, okay. I moved back to Dallas. I was going for a long time.
Grapevine's the area.
Yeah, it's a really big place. I don't know if you
Mills
guys
is a
know.
mall.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll call you when I'm lost next time.
I got you.
So it is true for all of these individuals, for these families, and for these young adults. And what it will entail is a rethinking not only of school time and what that looks like. And I firmly believe that the education system, what I am so passionate about this particular topic is this is what the future of instruction will look like, in my opinion. We will quickly move away from rows and seats in classrooms to settings that look more like and resemble what you will see in industry, what you see in employer settings. And for our employers, what that's going to mean is that they have a willingness and an ability, a capacity to support students in a learning setting. Have 20 kids show up to your workplace tomorrow and see how that goes. We are not prepared for it, right? It is not something that we know how to do. But if we think about what instruction will have to look like for the privileged and for the under-championed, it will look like that setting. And we have to figure out ways to get employers to restructure what the workday looks like in juxtaposition to schools restructuring what the learning day looks like.
Yeah, great point. Look forward to when you head back to TEA and take over and just sort all that out and make it
I'll put that on my checklist here.
Get that down for us.
I got that.
Just reform the school day.
got
Get that
it.
for us to be great.
Got that for you.
So we're going to go to Armando next. We'll see if we can keep him in his seat for the answer here. He's excited.
Strap
That's
me
good.
down.
So I want you to talk a little about the book, but for more why it's necessary, how it might equip organizations, how it might impact the audience here, other stakeholders in order to develop, communicate those skills that you're talking about to higher education opportunities, employers, and so on.
Yeah. You have to realize that everything that's been spoken about or alluded to from the tee-off to now, the playbook is right there. It's literally there. How can you be an organization to allow for that restructuring of the school day? It's in the book. I saw people furiously writing down what Chike said. Guess what? It's in his foreword, right? From the I am an organization that I work with youth, but I need to know how to train my folks up because we're losing them, and we saw that post-COVID. Yeah. Guess what? There's 2 case studies in there. Everything you're looking for, if you're interested in this, if you just want to get your toe wet because you want to know more, there's entry-level information to a playbook of how to create your own nonprofit in the OST space, to even what I was just talking about with how we have boiled down with a case study of what we did with the D-Custom project, where our youth sat down for 8 months with D-Custom, learned from them in an OST space, and then designed, ideated, and created the book that we actually use and have used for the last 2 years to go out and talk to funders and people interested in big thought. that is literally was made by our Opportunity Youth. It's in there. So if this is intriguing to you in any format, read the book. Countless hours, I kid you not, countless hours of each person's experience, hundreds of years of educational and workforce readiness experience. And then myself, I just got my degree from St. Edward's and I did a darn good job. And it was interdisciplinary. I was highlighting things and printing out research because I want to go deeper. So even for somebody who's been a practitioner for 23 years, there's even stuff for me in there. That's how amazing that book is and a resource for you. That's my plug.
Pay good money for that D Magazine Partners plug, so appreciate that. But D Custom was also part of our content marketing company was working with Big
Did an
Todd,
amazing
and,
job.
Yeah, it was really fun to have y'all in the office, and I know that made a huge impact on folks that work with you.
Can I say one thing about that?
Please.
It allowed one of our youth to get a digital badge, right? So we're talking about paper ceilings here. We're talking about opportunities. We're talking about breaking barriers. It allowed one of our youth, who they said, really, we don't usually allow this apprenticeship for people until they're post-bac, or really we even prefer them to start at least a year into their master's before we allow them this opportunity. And because of how amazing, and we already know that she was amazing, and she'll talk to us in a minute and give us our call to action, was able to get an apprenticeship with them. So it's also about breaking down those barriers and creating those spaces that you're referring to, right? So kudos to y'all for creating that space, and kudos to Amazon for creating that space as well.
Yeah. You didn't have to tell us you were Luddite. All you had to say was that you printed out research to look at.
I'm dyslexic also, I have to highlight. And when you look at my book, you're like...
Next to your map quest on the link for this, you could print out for Jarrad.
Thank you.
Got you.
Thank you. Shots fired.
Sorry.
I wear that title with pride.
He does. Okay, Chike, we'll finish with you here.
Sure.
Your forward was mentioned in the book, but you bring this interesting concept of sort of switching up what we kind of know as a social safety net from one that just prevents people from falling off a cliff and getting into a rough situation to an economic trampoline, I think is the term that gets used, propels students into meaningful and dignified work. Can you talk a little about how the book, your work in this space, can move that prevailing assumption of outside of time beyond just, like we said at the beginning, a safe place where my kids will be okay and not get hurt, to that economic trampoline?
I mean, a lot of what's been said kind of covers that, making sure that they're exposed to those right set of skills. But I'll say two things. If you go to the workforce space, you'll hear about a concept called navigation. So when someone loses their job in America, one of the toughest things to help them figure out is, okay, what do I want to do next? All right, I was shorter to cook. I want to figure out something else because during COVID, my restaurant got closed, for example. That is a deeply involved process. And to be honest, as a system, we don't do that well. We don't help people do that well, if we're very candid. The thing that I might add to the conversation is ideally OST would serve a similar purpose for a young person. So we talk about, for example, intellectual curiosity. You're curious about things that you love. And how do we help this space not simply be, and again, I used to work at the Department of Labor, so there's a way to think about this where it's just, this is about kind of being an economic conveyor belt. I need X in my economy, I produce this amount of people. And there's some of that. But not everyone is meant to fit in the exact same space. And so how do we actually help the young people navigate to what they love, to what that superpower is? To what that is, so that they can go where they're great. One thing I'll say to a lot of people that I talk to every now and again, younger people who are looking for a job, one of the first things I say is you have to figure out what you're good at. And I actually push them really hard. I say, what are you 2 or 3 standard deviations better at than the average person? Which is a high bar, and these are folks in their mid-20s, folks in their early 30s. Imagine if we had an OST that helped someone figure that out when they were 12, when they were 7. And the way to do that is a combination of deep reflection internally, reading, sitting with yourself, and then also wide exposure. I'm gonna show you as much as possible. And what generally happens if you do those two things, at some point you're like, that's it. How do we, on top of all the other things that we're looking to do in OST, we actually say, let's help you navigate to that 2 or 3 standard deviation place where you're gonna be most happy with yourself, but frankly also most useful, frankly, to the rest of us. And right now we don't quite do that well. And I think we have to make that part of what OST is. And I'll double down here. if we think about the folks of us who have been the most lucky, we got that. I think about my little girl. I have 2 kids. My son is 7. My daughter's 2. She has stumbled onto art. She loves art. She will sit and do it for hours. She's 2.5. She's a very lucky, blessed little girl. I think about whether it's the inner beltway of Prince George's County where I'm from, whether it's Oak Cliff, whether it's the east and west side of Baltimore City in Maryland. There are a lot of kids who are never that lucky. And we try and put them places. And we wonder why they're not successful. And so I think adding that navigation piece and that self-discovery piece, combined with all those other things, I think that's where you're going to get that magic. Number one, for that child in the community, but also for our economy and for the world.
All right. Great. Well, Dave, cut off our mics.
Yeah, I think so. I think literally it's off now.
Can y'all give a hand for the panel, please?